about, because children are so pure that they don't think like we as adults think.
Yeah. And speaking of our children and what we got up on, and so as it relates to teachers, a lot of our students, their teachers don't look like them. And so when, like my son, my middle son, when he's angry, it's all over his face. It's all over his face. He doesn't want to talk. He doesn't want to be bothered. Just let him be. He do his work. But I've had conversations with a teacher and I'm like, he's upset. That's all it is. He's upset. He's fine. He's not going to do anything. But the fact that she felt the need that she needed to contact me because she thought that there was an issue happening that's probably going to happen at school because of the way he responded to another student. But all he said was, leave me alone. I don't feel like it. But in her mind, he was being aggressive because he did not want to talk about what happened. And it was, I don't know, I think he broke up with his girlfriend or something like that, something minute. But it escalated to a conference phone call, which I thought was really petty. And so when you have your students who can't even relate to the teachers and the teachers can't even relate to the students, or they don't have the mechanisms to know that, okay, this is not aggressive behavior. This is just what young boys of color do. They keep to themselves. Everyone doesn't vent and say what's going on to the first person they know. They keep to themselves. And so I think because I'm actively involved with my kids' school, I think I was met with better reception of what I said and how I responded to the teacher. But you have families and parents who are not active in the school. And so it becomes, he's angry, so now I'm gonna send you to the office. Now he's even more angry because he went to the office and he didn't do anything. But by the time he gets to the office, he probably has done something because he's probably said something. Why am I going to the office? What did I do? And oftentimes our students are escorted to the office by an officer.
Yes.
So now the problem has escalated. So now I have a problem with the officer taking me to the school. And nowadays, if you're seen as an issue at school, then a ticket is written. And so that's when we get into that school to prison pipeline. This child went to the office, went to the principal, got however many days suspension because he broke up with his girlfriend.
Yeah. And my big statement on that, and it starts with educating the teachers, the person of authority, is that you accepting that your normal is not everyone's normal. Just because you handle anger one way doesn't mean everybody handles it one way. Just because that person is quiet doesn't mean that the next step is going to be aggression. Sometimes they're just quiet to process, and that is a normal stage that people need to be allowed to process in. And if we can work through educating, particularly in this situation, our teachers on the different process of mental health, that these are the stages of grief, these are the stages of aggression, then they'll be able to readily recognize them instead of just jumping to, this is a problem, let's call the parents, or this is a problem, let's call the school resource officer so he can come down here and manhandle this child down to the principal's office, because none of those options are really the best option to go with. If you really wanted to think about what the best option is, it would be to call your school social worker and have them come down to talk to that student and see how they're feeling and what they're going through. That's what school social workers are supposed to be for. But that's not what we're using them for.
What do you say to those individuals who say teachers are not counselors?
And they're not, but they're working with the public, so they need to have a level of psychological training that they don't have. And that's not at the fault of the teacher. That should come with teacher education. That should come with part of their psychology, part of their education degree, part of their continued education training that teachers get every year.
So I'm going to interrupt for just a second and say that I'm so sorry. I think our first fabulous few minutes were not live. And so I'm going to introduce you again. and we'll recap your first fabulous few minutes. So this is our new friend, Miss Tatum Carter, and she's a licensed marriage and family therapist and joining us from Carrollton. And there's Danita down there. And I'm just kind of observing because we're focusing on mental health for people of color and especially at this very difficult time. And you had talked about how there's so many barriers. One of them, just there aren't nearly as many people of color in this field. And so when a person of color is reaching out to someone, and it might be, it's usually a white therapist and they just don't understand, and they might misdiagnose things that they don't realize are just part of the culture, or all kinds of things that can re-traumatize them. Um, I'll let you speak to that again. And what are the main barriers you see for
Sure,
mental health?
absolutely. Like you said, the biggest barrier is that people of color want to reach out to a therapist that is of color like them. And especially if you're talking about a male person of color, they don't want to go sit and talk to therapy with a white person, especially a white woman, because she's going to have no connection to what they have endured in life. So that's the biggest treatment is finding a person of color that can connect to you on a level of experience. And the
Yeah,
other side of that,
saying that person may not feel comfortable. They feel judged in that space.
mhm,
Mhm.
There's no time for that in therapy.
not at all, not at all. Therapy should always be a comfortable place where you can express yourself and feel validated in what you're saying and not feel judged. And that is something that therapists are taught to do, and they don't always do it.
And Danita, you were saying that at work, when if things happen at work and you go to someone above you that you're supposed to go to, then you might get labeled as the angry black person. And so that
Mhm.
you just fake nice, and you just
Yep.
learn to let things go or keep them inside. And so that causes trauma too.
Right. It causes a lot of stress. It
Mhm.
causes a lot of anxiety. I know for myself personally, I would just avoid certain people. The person I would uh, had issues with, I would just avoid because it was just easier to avoid than to say, "Oh my God, you're still here," because I made a complaint, yet you're still here.
Hmm.
I made a complaint and no one has talked to you. So my complaint fell on deaf ears. So why even bother to complain again? Because now I still have to deal with you. And now you know that I complain. So in the back of your mind, it's don't say anything else because this is your job. Single mom, retaliation is around the corner somewhere. Don't, as my grandmother would say, don't stir the pot. So you're left dealing with it. And it's just you a lot of people look at HR as the fixer of work related issues, but they're a fixer for a certain group because if you have a certain complaint, that's not fixable.
Mhm.
Like if you
And
have a racial complaint, that's really not fixable.
mm, no, and particularly in that situation you mentioned, Danita, now you're avoiding this person that you've had a conflict with. So now they're going to go to HR because now they're in a hostile work environment. And
Right,
that's fixable by getting rid of you. And
right,
that's the outcome of a racial complaint. Even
right.
though yours was the spearhead that started things, your complaint started things, you're the one that's going to be left without a job.
Yeah,
And so that's why making the complaint is never really an option for the person of color because I know the outcome. I know where this is going, is
yeah,
how they feel. And that's trauma for them. It's trauma. I work in trauma because if I go somewhere and report this, then I'm going to have another trauma of not having a job.
right.
So Tatum and Danita, do you feel like then people go home and talk about that openly with their families and friends, or because I hear you saying that at work and with peers of other colors, you feel pressure to keep a happy face on. Um, is there eh, is there any place that you feel safe to open up, or is it just against cultural norms to do that?
I the safest place I feel opening up to is my mom. My mom, and then I have a good friend who's a clinical social worker. So I'll bounce things off of her. But everyone is not fortunate as me to have a clinical social worker in their backyard free of charge to address your issues or your concerns. So I'm blessed in that aspect. But also, I don't call my mom a lot when things are happening because now I'm giving her my issues. And now she's a state away and she's concerned for my well being because then her response becomes, Danita, you know, you have these kids, just don't say anything else. Because she knows the outcome. She's experienced the outcome before and she knows what will happen. And so her initial instinct is to protect me and my kids. And so after I vented for several months, she was like, Danita, you filed a complaint, nothing's happened. The realization is nothing is going to happen. So don't say anything else again because, you know, you have the kids and jobs are scarce. And so I have to tell my mom, okay, I'm dropping it, even though it was a lie, but I have to give her peace of mind. Because at this point, she's nervous for me. I've given her anxiety because of what I'm going through. And I don't want her to have anxiety or stay away to be concerned about me. So I square it up with her. Oh, I'm good. Everything's fine. Yeah, I let it go. Everything's fine now. I guess they just needed a push, knowing that that's not true. But I had to save my mother, and that was more important to me than revealing to her that it was still going on. And so as a person of color, we have to make those types of sacrifices to save our families.
Mm-hmm. I think that in communities of color, we go to our mothers. That's who we go to. And that's why Black women have to be so strong, because they're carrying the burdens of themselves, maybe their husband, and their children. And so that's always our first option, is to go to our mother and rely on our mother. However, in relying on our mother, we also have now traumatized her with our issues. And so, we have to pull that back and take that back from her, because we don't want to traumatize our mothers.
Mm-hmm.
But I can also say, as a therapist, that I have friends that come to me just to unload, and they call, they text, and they just unload, and then they're fine. Yeah. But like Danita said, not everybody has that friend that can just listen. Just listen. It's not always about fixing it. It's just letting me unload it so that I can pick up tomorrow and keep on going.
Right.
And one thing that I wholeheartedly stand by is journaling, is because it has to come out. It cannot stay in. And I support journaling for everyone, but especially people of color, because they are carrying so much that they don't often realize what they're carrying. If you sit down and journal and start about, from the moment I woke up, this is what I did and how I endured and how I felt about it, you would realize how much trauma you experience in one day, first of all, and then you would experience how light you feel because you got it all out of your body. That is physically manifesting to bad things in your body. Just like Danita mentioned, anxiety, high blood pressure, and now you're creating a bad circle for yourself of health problems. You went from a mental health problem to a physical health problem.
So it's funny you should say the journaling part, because I remember growing up, I was maybe 11 or 12, and my mom would come home from work and she would write down stuff. And I would ask her, what are you doing? Well, I'm writing down what happens at work. And I'm like, why are you writing down what happened at work? Because this is my proof. When I do file a complaint, I have everything. And subconsciously, I started doing it when I got a job. I would write down everything every day. This happened, not negative or positive. I would write it down. And it sort of was like, it was a release, But at the same token, it was my proof that this happened, and no one can tell me otherwise. It was sort of like my camera of what happened. So if someone said this happened, I can go back and said, yes, it did at 8:25 on July 2nd. This is what you said, and this is what you did.
And I think
Because,
all Black people do that. I know I have done it. And in the current day and age, I have screenshots of text messages, I have screenshots of emails so that I can support my word, because you're not just going to believe what I say out of my mouth. I have to have physical proof. Although the person against me can just say what they want to say, I have to have proof to support what I'm saying.
I've made a habit of forwarding myself emails, or when I make a complaint, I'll blind copy my personal email. So I know that there was an email trail in case you say, I didn't get an email, and I can tell you, yes, you did, because I sent it to you. I have a copy of it.
Yep, on your personal email, because they will wipe your work email out and you will lose what you thought you had saved. Yes.
So the work environment for a person of color is already a hostile work environment when you get there, because you have to be strategic of how you communicate. You have to be strategic in how you respond, and you have to be strategic in who you respond to. I was always taught, you go to work, you do your job. You're not there to make friends, because if you're coming in and these people have been here for years, you don't really know who's working for who, or who's trying to get promoted. So I'm always, well, you never talk to anyone. I just come in and do my work. Oh, you're so not sociable. I am sociable. I'm just not really sociable in this environment because I don't trust you.
But then with that, then you're not sociable, you're not easy to work with. So now you're not getting promoted. So now you have the trauma and the anxiety of, this place doesn't like me, because they don't get to see the real you, because you're not allowed to be who you really are.
Yeah. Right.
Well, that's such a revelation, how stressful it sounds. Oh my gosh. So you're talking, Tatum, about the block to mental health as far as lack of therapists of color, and then also the strength that you all feel that you have to maintain at work. Does that, is there a block? Is there a roadblock to people of color feeling comfortable going to therapists in the first place within their community, if they could find one? I've read that. I don't know if that's true. There's a stigma.
There's a stigma. There's a stigma. As a person of color, we're taught that mental health is not real. You don't let those people into our business. You go to church, you pray, you talk to Medea. You don't go to therapy. I think that is instilled in children, in color people of color instill that into their children. If you tell people what's going on in this household, they will take you away. And that is just the stigma that they've taught them for so many years. If the white people know what happens in this house, then you will have to go live in foster care, or you will be taken away from me. And so you just don't speak out what happens in this house.
Yeah. What's in this house stays in this house.
Yep.
Because I say it to my kids. I say it to my kids. What happens in this house stays in this house. Because, and I don't want anyone to be offended, because when you have the good little white lady over here something, she's going to take it out of context. And then she's going to file a complaint, and then she'll be at the door. But you took it out of context because you don't really understand the lingo of what my child was saying. My mama beat my tail last night. No, she really didn't beat your tail. You got a whooping, but that's it. But you took it out of context and you ran with it. So I always tell my, unless, there's something abusive, please tell someone. You don't even have to tell me. I don't want you to feel like you have to come to me, because I don't see everything, but I want you to feel comfortable enough to see someone or talk to someone. And I tell them that at school, please find you one teacher that you can talk to, that you can go to. If anything were to happen on campus, you can go to that teacher. And I always try to tell my kids, make sure you have a good relationship with at least one teacher, at least one. because that would be your outlet at school, and that would be your advocate.
And growing up, I was taught that you don't go to therapy, you don't seek treatment. And it wasn't until I experienced postpartum depression that I realized that it is real. And I went to my mother and she just was like, just get over it. Just you have a new baby, get over it. And I'm like, this is not possible. And that's
You're
when
just tired.
yeah, and that's when I spoke to my doctor who told me that postpartum depression is real. And I'm like, and I accepted that it was real and went and got treatment. And that was the spearhead that showed me that one, there's no Black therapist for me to see. There's no psychologist therapist. And like I said, I'm growing up in Minneapolis where the population of Black people is 4%. So I got 4%, let alone someone with a college degree that's going to treat me. So they couldn't understand that I can't talk to anybody at home about what I'm feeling. And so that spearheaded me into understanding mental health and going into that field so that I can give back to those that don't know what I didn't know.
Why do you
God,
think people of color don't go into that field?
I don't think they're aware of it. I don't think they're because they're taught that mental health is not real. So I don't think they're aware of it first of all, and then I don't think that they're supported in understanding that it's a career option. Because when I went into the field, you're taught, okay, you're just gonna you go and you sit on someone's couch and you get paid, and that's all that the field is. But it's so much more than that. And if we don't educate them at a college admissions level of what this career can provide for you and what options you can use to go through to do with your career and your education, then they'll never know. Because I
so
didn't know.
are most of your patients people of color? And also tell us about your trauma group you have.
So ideally, most of my patients are not people of color because right now, most of my patients are eating disorder patients, which are white girls with a lot of money. So that limits them. I see patients throughout the entire state of Texas. So that can just put into perspective my patient base. And I can think of 5 that are people of color right now, 5. So it's not a strong population, but that's what I'm trying to grow. I'm trying to connect with them on a different level. Um, I also support a community trauma group for people of color on Monday nights, and it's just for people of color to join and come in and just have an open, safe space to share what they're feeling, to share what they went through that day or that week, so that, like I said, they can let it go and then they can pick up and keep going the next day or for the next week. And there's no judgment. It's just release it and let's keep moving on.
What have you seen have been the changes or mental health needs they've had in these last few weeks since George Floyd's death? And how has that changed?
I think since that traumatic event, one thing that I've seen changed is that they are more vocal about what they need. They are more vocal at work about that's offensive to me, and I'm not going to sit here and let you just say that. Or I'm allowed to speak my mind. I'm allowed to embrace my culture. I'm allowed to wear my hair in braids. I'm allowed to wear my African jewelry, and you're not going to judge me negatively for that. But I think their needs have changed in that they need to hear that they're supported, that they're validated in those actions because they're cut down so much all day long at work for it that they just need to continuously hear you're right in that decision and you're supported in that decision because it is the right decision. It's not a wrong decision.
Mhm. But I think on top of that, it's also important for people to know that people of color that are in authority, they say these things too. I've been told that you have to you have to change your hair. And I said, well, I'll change my hair when you give me the money to change my hair. because I just got my hair done and I like my hair. So when you cut the check for me to do my hair again, then we can talk. And she was a person of color. But I was just offended that someone that's a person of color would say that. You know, I mean, yes, I did marketing for the company or what have you, but I didn't foresee that as being an issue because I wasn't selling my hair. You know, and I think, you know, a lot of issues are within our own community because we've developed a concept of fitting in. And if we fit in, we won't receive the same treatment as those who are bucking against the establishment. So we just tend to fit in. We're going to wear our hair straight. You know, we're not going to go in our natural state, although I might want to. We're not going to do that. We're going to sit and act with, you know, the cool kids, you know, per se, and we're not going to rock the boat. And they are the ones that the company goes to tone down someone like me. Can you go talk to her? You know, not knowing full well that what they just told you is like, you know, a semi-microaggression. You go talk to her because you can relate to her, as opposed as I'm gonna talk to her.
Right. Or instead of you go talk to her and report back to us what her struggles are.
Yep.
Because she'll relate to you and share them with you. That's not what they're after. They're after you go calm her down.
Right.
Well,
Right.
I see that as an opportunity for change within all of us, right? And all these business cultures right now and workplaces that everyone's open and wanting to make those changes. So I'm hearing that as an ally, that's the kind of thing someone in the workforce could do is just make sure people are comfortable being themselves, huh?
And one thing that I have spoken up on is that if the culture in employers can change to, instead of me having one chain of command to go to, like if I have a complaint against Danita and my only resource is to go to Laurie, who's not going to understand the dynamics of Danita and I's relationship, then my complaint is going to fall on deaf ears. It's not going to go as far as it needs to go. So if companies can establish panels of chain of command. So maybe I have Laurie and maybe I have a Black man and a Black woman so that I know somebody's going to understand. I have a couple options of who I can go to with my issue. And then they can together discuss it on the panel, but at least I know that it's going to be heard, fully heard,
Right.
and not just written on a piece of paper and put in a file.
Yeah. So I'm hearing, I heard you say, and that sounds like a good thing that's happening is people are feeling more like they can speak out and they feel like it's safer to speak out. So that's awesome. Are you seeing any trauma, like just more anger about that this just it keeps happening or um what are you seeing?
I
Grief?
think I think that there is a level of grief that it keeps happening. They're definitely feeling grief. I think that the trauma that they're feeling is it's so magnified because they felt so much trauma in their lifetime that they don't even realize how big the trauma is for them. It's just another trauma for them. When in reality, this is a major trauma. And this has spearheaded a major movement that is happening in our society, which is a traumatic movement, good or bad, it's traumatic. We're all watching this happen. And that is yet another traumatic event that Black people are experiencing, and they don't realize how it is negatively affecting them.
What do
I
you
read
think?
in your article in Psychology Today that you couldn't bring yourself to watch the George Floyd video. And I wanted you to expound on that, but I wanted to say to you why I watched it. I watched it as I've watched the others because I didn't want to lose my footing on my advocacy. I didn't want to become complacent. I didn't want to say, okay, they've made a law over here. You know, they made a resolution over here. I wanted to, in essence, keep my fire burning and not succumb to the one little minute victory, but to say, you know, this is still happening. This is a whole nother state now. So that's why I watched the video. So I wanted you to expound on why you did it.
Now, let me correct you because that wasn't my article because I have watched that video.
Okay.
Yes. And like I said, I'm from Minneapolis. I
Yeah.
have wholeheartedly watched that video. I have
Okay.
supported the individuals that are against that video. And
I think there was someone else I put a link on that hadn't, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's about your
yeah, yeah. My feelings are that that is my hometown.
Yeah.
Those are my friends. That's my community. And I want to, like you said, have the fire burning within me to support them. Even further than that, that neighborhood is where I grew up. That store is the store I grew up going to as a little girl. So that just further fuels my want and need for education and resources and support in support of this movement.
Wow. So how do you feel being from Minneapolis that people, when they discuss the incident of George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd, how do you feel when they say, well, you know, he had a counterfeit $20 bill, as if to justify his murder?
No, his life is worth so much more than $20. And that's how I feel about it. You're not going to justify his murder for $20 in no way, shape, or form.
Right.
What do you think, um, people of color, what's your best advice for Black people going through all of this trauma to stay well and healthy right now? What are you doing for yourself?
I think that it is important to seek treatment. And I don't mean that in go and see a psychiatrist and get on medication. I mean go see a psychologist and do talk therapy and get it out. If you can't do that for whatever reason, then utilize your resources. There are a numerous amount of free and virtual support groups going on right now just because of what is happening. And all you have to do is join them. And it gives you options to talk to licensed therapists and talk in peer support groups with other people who are fighting the same battles that you're fighting. I think those are the two biggest things I would say. But I also would say use your circle of support, rely on your friends, rely on your family, and so that in turn you guys can grow together because we're all going through the same struggles and we all have to continue to grow. We can't just leave everybody behind and then wonder why we're so much better than them. You have to bring them with you as you're growing and changing so that as a society we can grow and change.
What would your advice be for white allies, in helping support people of color with their mental health?
I would just say to continue to educate yourself. There's so many resources out there. There's so many books. There's so many websites that are offering information for how you can educate yourself on what the Black culture is going through and why they're going through it and what they may be feeling. And then once you've educated yourself, then you can talk to your Black friends, talk to your people in your Black community accordingly. Don't just go to them and say, how can I help you? What are you going through? Because a lot of times, one, they don't know because they're still processing it. And two, that just comes across as insensitive. They want you to do your homework first and come to them and offer the ways that you can support them. I read an article that talked about A, B, and C. Let's discuss it. Is that true? How does that process into your life? How can I support the change that you're trying to make because of that? Versus how can I help you?
Okay.
How can you, what do you say to our white allies that are a part, want to be a part, they want to be allies, they want to be helpful, but they're not fully ready to come full terms with their own privilege?
I think that one, they have to accept that their privilege is real. It's there. And yet again, I go back to educating themselves, and reading books about what white privilege is so that they can understand where they've benefited from in their life, because they may not even know where they've benefited from. And once they educate themselves on it, then they can have, yet again, that conversation with their Black friends about, I didn't realize that I was able to do A, B, and C because I was white. And I had no clue that you were not able to do that.
Right.
And apologize for their ignorance on the subject. Doesn't mean that you were wrong, but you just didn't have that education factor on it. When to a Black person, it's so clearly in front of us, how can you not see it? We take that as disrespectful that you couldn't see it.
Yeah.
And so if you can just educate yourself and then apologize for not seeing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What would you say to people, to white allies who are having very emotional times right now dealing with their own family members that might be more racist, and they're arguing and they're trying to decide, and I'm bringing this up because it's happening to a lot of the people in our group. They're trying to weigh those emotional connections with what they feel in their hearts and what they want for their kids. Do
Mhm.
you have any advice for them?
I think the biggest thing I can tell them is to follow your heart and do what's right for you and your kids.
Mhm.
I can't say that grandma is the best or the worst person because she doesn't agree with what you're seeing, but what grandma experienced and the trauma she experienced can't relate to what your children are going to experience. And so you have to prepare them for what they're going to experience and not base it on what grandma experienced. And so it may mean that those people have to take a step back from the involvement of your everyday life so that you can support the growth and change that's going to happen within yourself and your children and your future generations. Um, it's a big thing when we were shown, there was, I think it was a Time magazine or People magazine, where they said this is what the future is going to look like, and it was a biracial kid with blonde hair, and that's the direction that society is eventually going. There's so many biracial kids, there's mixed cultures, and us continuously teaching division and is not going to benefit our children going forward. We have to teach them inclusion of everybody.
Yeah, it's going to leave them unprepared for for reality.
Mm-hmm.
What do you say to people within your community? And I know this is still a thing, that have been passing for years. They've been passing, and now all of a sudden they have their Black Power moment. But you
Mm-hmm.
really haven't been in the struggle because you've been passing. But now you want your feelings validated too, but you haven't been in the struggle. What do you say? What am I what should I say to them?
Mm-hmm. You know,
Then you
that's a big one.
explain to me what passing means.
Okay, so passing is someone that's a person of color or a biracial person of color that is light enough, have the good hair that they can pass as Caucasian, and they do.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And this is a big one for me because I struggle with this one. I struggle
Yeah,
with accepting
I'm
the people
struggling
who
too.
have been passing and now they want to come be pro-Black. You
Yeah.
weren't pro-Black when you were passing. And so personally, I have the struggle with that as well, Danita.
Okay.
Um, the only thing I can do is try to not throw their past back into their face and continue to educate them on the right ways to do things, and in hopes that they will have the internal lesson of understanding what they did wrong, because it's not my place to teach them what they did wrong,
Hmm.
but it still is hurtful to me. Like, I feel like you betrayed
Yeah.
me,
Yeah.
and
Because
now
you
here
need an
you,
out,
yeah.
and I don't have an out. All of us don't have an out.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah. And Larry, thank you so much for asking me what that was, what it meant. I really appreciate when you're genuinely asking questions that you've never ever heard terms. I really appreciate that. And for me, I think that's why we click so well, because you're okay with not knowing. You're comfortable to ask, okay, I don't know what that means. What does that mean? And I appreciate that. And I think that's why we do so well together, because you are comfortable not knowing. And I want other people to be comfortable not knowing. I mean, there are things I don't know. You know, us Black people, we don't know everything. You know, we know a lot, but we don't know everything. And I applaud people who are upfront about what they don't know, what they've never heard before, and want an explanation of it, because maybe they've seen someone in their own lives or within their own family that's doing it, and they can say, hey, do you know you're passing?
Oh,
You know, I didn't know that's what you were doing. You know, it can stimulate, conversations. And I like that.
Well,
And that is a perfect example of what I say in educating yourself and talking to your Black friends, because it's all about how we can come together to educate and grow.
yeah.
It's not just one-sided.
Right.
Also wanted to say to our members that we want to provide that circle of support, especially for our members of color, if that's something that you all want. So Tatum has offered to be that therapist for us, that we can hire her to do a group. Just if this is a hard, if you want a space where you can just speak openly about what you're going through and the trauma you're experiencing day to day, then we want to offer that for you without the white lady in the room. So so let us know if you want that. And Tatum, do you have any other great advice for just taking care of yourself right now? I mean, all of us are in this work. Some of us are new to it. Some of us are doing it most of the day. Some of us have been living it forever. Some of you all live it every day. So, what is your advice for just taking care of ourselves?
I think self-care is so important right now. You need to have those moments where you're shutting off the television so you're not hearing what's going on in the world. You need to put down the cell phone so you're not seeing what social media is talking about. Pick up a book that has nothing to do with what's going on in the world. Pick up a book that's about self-growth and manifestation of new things and new skills. And maybe it's just a book of word searches, but it's something that has almost meaningless efforts to your life so that you can just decompress and get over all the chaos that you have in your life, all the stress. Go to your safe space, if that's your bedroom or your garage or wherever it is, and take that moment for yourself. And it may be 5 minutes, it may be an hour. I think so many people are working from home right now. And the big thing that I tell them is, instead of pushing through for 30 more minutes of work, take that 15-minute break, go outside, become grounded, walk in the grass with no socks and shoes on, touch the earth for 15 minutes, and come back to those 30 minutes of work. Because when you push yourself through those final 30 minutes, it's so hard, and it ends up being 45 minutes anyways. So just take that 15-minute break to go reground yourself, and then come back, and you will finish that 30 minutes none the same.
That is great advice. And I feel like we are so motivated right now or we feel pressure. Everything we're reading, everything we're watching should be about better race relationships and anti-racist. But yeah, your idea to just read a book that's totally an escape is a good one. I
Yeah.
I
like
color.
you color with crayons or
No, actually, my kids, I have this collection of pens, and I keep adding to it. And my daughter tells me, you don't need any more pens. Oh my God. But there are certain types of pens that I color with so they don't bleed through. And my mother sends me coloring books, and she's just like, they're adult coloring books. So I'm not coloring, SpongeBob or anything, you know. They're
Oh,
not.
that is addictive. That's good therapy. You'll have
Yes,
to come in.
because sometimes I do lose track of time. I do lose track of time, and it's, believe it or not, it's relaxing, and I do
It
try to stay
definitely
inside the
is.
lines.
It definitely is. I have quite a few coloring books as a therapist, and I photocopy those pages for patients and I color them myself. So it is a therapeutic aspect to it.
And Tatum, do you have, you said you have one child?
I do. I have one son. He's actually 20 years old.
Oh, okay.
Oh, you're
Well,
another young man.
advice for parents right now taking care of, I mean, there's this is just such a crazy and difficult time. Just so difficult. So any advice for parents at home with kids?
I think right now we just have to practice patience and love for our children. They're struggling through this as well. Outside of the racial aspect of it, they lost a lot with they don't have school, they don't have friends, they're afraid of COVID. So they're home and they're living in fear just like everyone else is. But their fear is that they don't know. And when they go to mom and dad don't know either. So their fear is almost magnified. So you just have to practice patience and continue to love on them. Try to keep the same schedules that you normally had. So let's have dinner together, even though we've been home all day working at the dining room table. Let's clear it off and now have dinner here, or let's have a picnic in the living room floor, just together. It's all about keeping those same patterns, but being together.
Right.
And what is your advice on how much um, about police brutality and the details and everything and the stories, how much is safe to talk about with kids?
I think that's going to be motivated by their age. The conversation is going to be different with each age group of children, but I think that there needs to be a conversation about it with each age group and let them know that everyone's experience is different. Just because you get pulled over and it worked out this way doesn't mean that your friend won't get pulled over and it's worked out that way. Um, there was a television show that I seen where a young man that was black, was learning to drive with his black father, and he got pulled over, and it was, hands up, don't move. But then he got pulled over with his stepfather, who was white, and they were just casually talking with the police officer, and it just put into perspective how different it can be.
Yeah.
And so I think that the conversations with the children need to connect with them. But I also think that they need to see that police officers will be persons of all color. And that doesn't mean that anyone is better than the other. The black police officer may be just as bad as the white police officer, or the black police officer may be bad to the white kid. It still needs to be talked about with your children that it can happen.
Okay. Well, does either of you have any more burning questions or things that you think we need to know for this weird, strange time?
I think the one point that I just wanted to say was just as individuals, it's important that we push for the changes we want to see. So push the businesses for inclusion and diversity, push the companies, the movies, all those things for inclusivity. And then as parents to make sure that we're buying our kids toys and dolls that don't look like them, so that then when they go places, they're not shocked or afraid at seeing someone that's black or seeing someone that's in a wheelchair or whatever it may be. But
Right.
it starts at home with those things.
That's great advice. Danita, do you have anything else?
This is advice to my white allies. Be patient with yourself. We have experienced this our entire life. You're not going to get it in a day. You're not going to get it in one webinar. You're not going to get it in one textbook. You're not going to get it in one book club. We're still trying to get it. So just be patient with yourself. There's no time limit. There's not a certificate at the end of this, you know. So be patient with yourself. Um, it's okay to take a break because it's a lot. You're just reading about it. We live it. So just take a break, take a breather, step back sometimes, you know, from the group and come back because it can be, if you're not experiencing it, it could be so overwhelming to you, you would just feel inadequate because you don't, you have not developed ways to deal with it like we have.
Yeah.
And like Danita said, you can feel inadequate, but you're certainly not inadequate. So if you need to take that break to come back and keep going, please do that.
Yeah.
I appreciate that so much. And do come back. Do come back to be the ally and to stand with you and to make this movement happen finally. Um, I have a friend that said if she would be really angry, a black friend that said she would be really angry if in 2 months racism was solved in America because all these white people showed up and they're like, okay, now we know the problem, let's fix it. Then that would be so offensive to the generations of people who've been trying to solve it. So I can't think that, okay, now that I'm in this every day, it's going to get,
Yeah.
it's for the long haul. So we're going to take care of each other and have light moments too, where we're just enjoying each other.
Yes.
And don't try to force your family because you've had an epiphany that it's time for a change. Because
Okay.
your family might not be ready for that change. So you have to, it's sort of like my mom used to tell us when we would go to church, you have to model Christianity. So you have to model being an anti-racist. You have to model that. And maybe your husband will become equally yoked with you in being anti-racist. If he's not there yet, you can't make him be there yet. It's not, I can't be with you anymore because I'm anti-racist. And so we're going to have to, no, he's not there yet. And everyone's going to get there at their own time.
Good advice. Well, Miss Tatum, if people want to connect with you, maybe we can put your website or something on our link here,
Okay.
and we'll follow up again about having a small group time just for people of color to chat and talk about how things are going.
All
But we
right.
appreciate,
Also, your virtual trauma group.
yeah,
Yes, my virtual trauma group. We can post the link to that, and I'll share that with you.
thank you so much.
Thank you
And
for having me. It was so
I hope you have a good weekend with your family. Yes. And good night, everybody. Take care of yourselves. Mwah.
Bye.
And go see the fence this weekend. The awesome Say Their Names Memorial with your
Right.
family.
Yes.
It's really good.
Bye.
Bye.